Welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Jonelle.
And I'm Karen. We're your co-hosts, creating space for honest, open, and sometimes messy conversations about waking up as white women in a world shaped by privilege and cultural bias. Hey, Jonelle.
Hi, Karen.
You know, it's funny, as a teacher, I always can use words like, did you do your homework? But that's a trigger word for so many people. But let's talk about where we left off. The charge for last week was to look at some stories, some transgender, and in particular, I looked at transgender youth because we were talking about transgender youth stories. And I don't know if you did your homework, but I did mine.
I mean, I definitely did homework.
Yeah.
For anyone, hopefully listeners out there have checked out our website, whitewomenwakeup.com. We have some additional blog articles on there. So I have done a lot of additional research.
Yeah, you're doing all the writing. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I'm loving it. Hopefully other people are liking it too. So we'll see. But yeah, so I've done my research. What do you want to add?
Well, it's funny. I think, you know, one of the things that Jonelle and I talk a lot about offline is how we are learning so much just doing this podcast. And so I am really grateful that this is having me step outside of my normal. Not that I wouldn't care about transgender youth stories. I just don't know if I would seek them out. So I sought out a couple. And one of the things, I guess the word that comes to mind when I think about these stories is the beautiful, raw authenticity of both the young person and, gosh, I almost going to cry. I'm going to cry because I think about the parent. Over the stories that I had read, all the parents really embraced their young people. And all of the parents really were searching for ways to love on their kids and wanted their kids to just truly just find themselves. And most of the kids the stories I read a handful, they all identified really young, you know, like preschool, 4, 5, 6. They wanted, and some of the ways it was identified first is just what they wore, and wanting to wear pink instead of blue, or wanting to wear dresses instead of pants. And these parents, what just opened my heart were the parents that were like, hey, I'm going to be okay if my boy wears pink to preschool, and allowing them to be themselves. And then moving through these, you know, it was clear in these stories how important early parental shepherding, maybe I'm using the word shepherding, is important, because these young people they all reported some sort of kind of, you know, name calling, and some sort of people just not understanding, or things like, why are you in my bathroom? And parents, they had the stories that were there. Everyone had a resting place with their family. And it was just, it really warmed my heart. And it reminded me to just keep looking at people for who they are. People know their stories, even if you're 4 years old.
I love that. People do know who they are. And I love that parents and family are embracing their kids for who they are. So where did you find these stories? So
I'll give you some links. Okay. In fact, it's one story. Oh my gosh, I didn't quote this, remember, but one podcast was just a blogger that is a mom that likes to do fashion. And she's just sounds like, you know, every typical, well, I shouldn't say typical white woman, but she's, you know, she was just a mom. And then she, in her fashion blog, she decided to share stories about other kids that were trans. And I don't know if she didn't really, there wasn't really an intro on why to do these stories, like, is her child trans? But she must have felt compelled. It was really heartwarming.
I love that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, some of the research that I did was not as heartwarming as yours. All right.
Yeah, and this wasn't research. This was
not research. You're right.
Stories.
It was stories. It was a good point. The homework was just embracing and learning more about the trans youth community. And you're right. So in doing some more research for one of our most recent blogs, I found out on January 9th, a federal judge what is the word? Sorry, I can't remember the word right now, but basically overturned one of the rules of Title IX. So in 2021, Biden's administration added some LGBTQ plus um, protection rights in Title IX. And basically, this judge has now blocked it and has torn it down for all of the country. And so I don't want to go into too much detail around it. There's more within the blog, so please check it out on our website. But it was disheartening, and a lot of the ramifications of what we're seeing, because also what that can mean too is reversing Title IX in general. What does it mean for other LGBTQ plus rights? There's a lot of just possible ramifications for this. And so I kind of go into more in the blog. But yeah, that was a little bit more of my learning this week, which was a tough learning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And it is interesting, like, as we're learning, it's important to just kind of look at the details, right? It's kind of look at policies and laws and, maybe not always just respond quick to the sound bites in media.
Yeah.
So that's what we talked about. But I'm going to keep doing this because a couple things that I've learned in the last couple of weeks is this idea of opening myself up to different news sources. I'm going to start opening up my own purview of looking at news sources from other places. I did also, though, in this going down this trail, I'm also trying to a good friend of mine is a journalist, and she's always telling me that I need to go to these testing sources of biased media. And so I'm trying to do that as well. So anyways, we'll talk about that. Yeah, there's a lot of sites that say, okay, how many people do this, or is this newsworthy, and so forth.
Okay. Yeah. Future.
Okay, Jonelle, you're going to open up the talk today.
Speaking of sound bites. Yeah. Speaking of some sound bites, I actually am taking a sound bite because something happened recently.
Wait, can I interrupt real quick? Sorry. Listeners, remember, I haven't talked to Jonelle at all about this issue, so I have no idea what she's saying. So this is just like a conversation at dinner where someone opens up with someone.
That is a great reminder. The intent of this podcast is these are, as if, again, I don't know if we've told the audience, we haven't talked about this a lot, but we're mother and daughter. So it's hard to keep conversations from each other. But these are very common things that would come up just in natural conversation. Yeah. Hey, I heard this soundbite from the news, things like that, sparking things.
And our different generations often have us with different opinions on things.
Yeah. So
I don't know what you're saying.
This is a spicy one. And I feel like I say that about everything. But so Jamie Lee Curtis recently was quoted by saying something, speaking of media soundbite. And I think it's something that a mistake that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
So before I go into this, Jamie Lee Curtis is a big advocate for human rights. She's a big advocate just for a lot of progressive movement in this country and around the world. And so, but recently there was the fires in the Palisades, and it's impacted a lot of celebrity homes. And Jamie Lee Curtis was fortunate enough that her home was not impacted, but her neighborhood was impacted. And so she made a comment that said, "It's awful. It looks like Gaza or another war environment."
Yeah.
And why I really felt like this resonated in the sense that this is something we all do when we're in a tragic moment, is we want to compare. We want to...
Great topic.
We want to give... give analogies. And Karen kind of is laughing a little bit because she is the queen of analogies. Where, you're having a hard time and she's like, oh, it's kind of like this.
And they're never on.
Never on. It's like tomatoes and elephants or something. Yeah. Like it's not even in the same.
But the good news is you understand that I have no idea what you're talking about. So go on. But anyways, keep talking about Jamie Lee Curtis.
Right? So that's the same thing with this. It's a comment that definitely triggers a lot of people because as we know, Gaza and war-torn environments, I mean, there's death, there's destruction. I mean, it's a whole other
And these are both bad environments, but to compare them, this is the theme that you're talking about.
This is the theme that I'm talking about. It's not that Jamie Lee Curtis does not have the right to be devastated by the situation of the just, losing her neighborhood, her neighbors losing their homes.
Yeah.
That is a valid reason to be very upset. But we don't need analogies comparing tough situations.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's kind of but I felt like it's something that we can relate to. It's easy to slip out, to stay when you're in a tough space, to kind of bring yourself down to something else and comparative. And then the reality is, unfortunately, what it does is diminish those other things that are happening. It diminishes what you're experiencing, it diminishes other things. And anyway, so I love.
So you want my reaction? Is that crazy?
Love your reaction.
Crazy thing. Yeah, I can imagine Jonelle hearing the word compare and then saying, "Oh my gosh, my mother needs to hear this." Well, first of all, I love Jamie Lee Curtis. She has a transgender child. So
I didn't know.
Yeah. She and I too. It's funny that you should bring up. Not funny because that's language. Because these fires are horrible. Yeah. And so your theme here is the notion of comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a generational thing? I don't know. I would actually, this is something that as listeners, I would love to hear your feedback on that.
It's actually a white supremacy.
Okay, go.
And again, I know those words, white supremacy, scares people.
Yeah.
It conjures up images of hooded white men, but white supremacy really is just more in the sense of that a lot of our habits and tendencies as white people tend to think that we're right and above other people.
Well, I think it's interesting, right and above that you're saying right and above. I don't even think we notice.
Well, this is
we've lived in such a privileged space that I don't even think we notice.
No, and this is the point about why I say white supremacy sounds like scary. Yeah. But really white supremacy is just about not understanding our privilege as white people.
Yeah.
And so this is, so when I mean comparison, this is definitely the comparison of privilege, basically. A lack of understanding. I know her hardship there. She understands.
So let's talk about why I think better than any of this is, first of all, let me share my story about comparing, because Jonelle has been amazing with me to really call out, and I have to say it's been humbling to call out all the times I compare. And I compare all the time. And I don't know why. I think
I do know why.
Oh, why?
It was my fault.
Why was it your fault?
It was my fault. I can remember, I can pinpoint, sorry, audience, for the distraction. I would say probably about 10 years ago, you were really struggling to explain something.
Yeah.
And I shared with you the concept of analogies. And they changed the way you communicated. You began making analogies for everything.
Really? Interesting.
Literally everything.
Yeah.
It was, so I regret I kind of created an analogy nonsense.
Well, because I think what it doesn't do. So I compare all the time. I take something and I think I've heard what Jonelle has said, or I've heard what my friends have said, or I've heard what the conversation has said. And I then take it through my own personal lens and I compare it to either an experience I've had, or I compare it to something that I've read or something that I've seen. And I think innocently, let me finish. I think innocently, I'm doing it as a way to empathize with the situation. And yet it's caused us more hurt than it has if I had just stayed in and listened and tried to use words that describe the situation.
See, and I don't think you're alone, though. This is, I think this is a very common occurrence that well-meaning people do, and without understanding the harm that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done this so many times before. I mean, again, I was one who really kind of emphasized how analogies can work in stories to convey a message.
Yeah.
So obviously, I do this all the time, and I've had to really work on it. Since I've started watching you do it, then I've realized how tough that can be too. So I've also started working on my analogies with things and comparing, and how situations don't necessarily need to compare.
Yeah.
It's more about just listening to the person's lived experience.
Yeah.
And not comparing to your own or comparing to your understanding, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really, because if this podcast indeed is around conversations and having healthy conversations, when I used comparisons, and I still do, I just did it the other day. When I do, it often shuts the conversation down, because what in our relationship, what has happened is you then don't feel heard. You don't feel validated in what it is, the story you're telling.
Yeah.
And if we use the Jamie Lee Curtis situation, I do get her comparison. The words that I'm not her, I can't say this for her, but I can see that the words to describe should have been devastating, horrific, isolated, bombed out.
A comparison is not needed.
It's not needed.
It's still a
It's not needed because someone in Gaza, for example, has been living this out for 2 years. Someone in Ukraine has been living out, and even in Ukraine, I mean, this has been happening all over the world, not just those two spaces. Yeah. And so when we use these comparisons, especially when they're comparisons from someone else's story, we end up kind of shutting the conversation down again, don't we? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say the same thing about you say, okay, well, I don't feel validated, but the same respect, like, I know you can get defensive because that's not your intention.
Yeah.
And so these conversations don't go anywhere when we start to do comparisons.
Yeah.
And so it just was such a fascinating example that I heard, because again, she is the epitome of
all of
donating, of caring, but of all of us, truly well-meaning. We're out there, we're doing the work, we're trying, we're learning, we're all of that stuff. And yet we still say the wrong thing.
Yeah, or use our own tactics to do the real work, which is to be direct.
Yeah.
Use the actual words that describe something, to use stories that are personal to us. Well, on a good note, I'm going to tell you, now this is a sad story, but I'm going to tell, Janelle's laughing, I'm going to tell you that because we're doing this, I was able to sit in a conversation that I definitely wanted to compare. So, just had a conversation, and this is very sad. A good friend of mine's brother-in-law is in hospice and he's dying. Jonelle always calls me Debbie Downer. I'm sorry. But, and for those listeners, my mother and my father recently, Janelle's grandfather and grandmother, recently passed away in the last year. And, we got to walk alongside them through the death process, which is really difficult. It's really difficult for hospice people and nurses. And doctors, they've been in this situation often. And so they're comfortable with the signs of that process. For many of us who have not been in that story, or in that situation, it's very abstract. So when my friend was describing the last couple days, which were really hard and horrific, I didn't jump in. I didn't try to compare. I didn't use my own story. I just listened. And I don't want to brag like I'm amazing. Janelle's like amazing on that, but it also felt good. I didn't need to interrupt the story by my own comparison. I could walk alongside this friend in this really horrible space, letting them describe it without me interjecting anything.
Which is amazing. And I'm sure your friend felt even more validated by the situation. The conversation went better. I think it's so interesting you bring this up. I similarly have a couple friends right now going through some really hard times. All of them different things happening in their life, and they're all similar things that have happened to me in the last couple of years. Like, you and I can me and a lot of people.
Yeah, Jonelle had long haul COVID. I mean, just really tough stuff.
We had some really tough couple years and stuff. And so, but it's interesting now that we're moving into a better space and I'm seeing other people. I want to do the same thing. I also want to jump in and be, I understand and I know and and it's so hard because my heart goes out to my friends and what they're dealing with and the thing. And I can't take that pain away. And all I want to do is take that pain away by saying like, hey, I understand and you get through it. But as you and I know, that's not helpful. And that's not what you need to hear in that moment. And so it's so interesting. It's actually built me a lot of empathy for, I think, some of the things that people had said to me during those times that maybe I kind of judged for or I don't know, just like didn't feel good about. And so it's given me like a new understanding of like their position on this. But I don't know. It was just a poor Jamie Lee Curtis. She's getting a lot of backlash.
Was what, because obviously we talked about cancel culture a couple episodes back. And I was curious about that. Are we going to go as far as canceling her based on that conversation? And I can imagine, I'm not going to judge that because I have not experienced what it's like to live in Gaza, what it's like to be an Israeli citizen at both sides, Ukrainian, all these sides. I do have a place that is exposed to fires, and I understand that fear and needing to leave immediately. And yet my home has not burned down. And so I don't want to judge her, but what are we going to cancel her?
See, and no, and I don't judge her at all. I brought it up as a great topic. I feel like so many can relate to. And it kind of does go back to the cancel culture conversation in the sense that like there are times to cancel people and there are times to not. There are times to let people learn with growth. This is obviously a person who's done work, who made a mistake, and we all make mistakes. And I think it's the way that I think people, how we help respond to help learn and grow within the situation. And also, but again, agreed, the statement is awful. And it's
not very empathetic.
No.
I do, though, this is the other side of the story. And I don't know if Jamie Lee Curtis will do this, is I know she's done so much work that I have to believe she would be the first to apologize. That, because that's the other side to this is, wow, you were talking about it with the Sundown Town, that young woman that identified that, oh my gosh, now I understand this. I am sorry that this language may have been offensive.
That's a really good point. An apology is when we make a mistake, like also backtracking from our defensiveness kind of thing. Really understanding how they've impacted people. And again, I think this, like, as I said, the reason I brought this up is it feels very relevant to a conversation you would have at your family table. Like someone just bring it up, like it's so awful. It's just like war zone. And then I could see someone else being like, that is awful. Why would you say that? And get into these family fights when really we need to recognize, that statement was inappropriate, but like, where is it coming from? And are there growth opportunities?
And do they apologize for it too? Do they back? Because obviously I've said a lot of things in my day. I said something to my sister the other day about the loss of her dog. That was so not compassionate. Anyways, very out of touch. And I apologize. And she was great with it. I want to speak one more thing into this subject because I think it's a really interesting subject and I don't want it to be sidestepped. So you made this comment that comparing is rooted in white supremacy. Is that not the way you said it?
I don't want to say comparing. I mean, that's like a big jump to say comparing in general. But I think what I more meant is the comment of taking your pain and comparing it to someone else's pain or circumstance.
Okay.
Is rooted in I mean, privilege.
So I was going to say, maybe,
but in statements of privilege.
Maybe we okay. I was going to say, maybe we change that language because it feels really big to say white supremacy. And although I'm not afraid to say that, and I want to be really clear that I am working on that I am definitely part of that culture, but I really appreciated the language of inherited culture. This language of, so because I'm white, I've obviously inherited a lot of cultural ways of navigating myself in conversations and in the world. And although my intention was not to be supreme in what you're saying, it has resulted in shutting people down. Yeah. It has resulted in people not being able to be truly their authentic self, because we definitely want someone who has gone through any of those horrific experiences to be able to authentically talk about their experiences through their own lens. Yeah. So I don't know. And again, is it the word white supremacy, or is it more inherited culture, or is that the same thing? Kind of.
Well, I think that's what I'm trying to get at is like, we're really scared to use the word white supremacy.
Yeah.
As kind of like, as we've talked about, racist. But the reality is white supremacy, white privilege, inherited, they all kind of are hand in hand. It's just the images that we conjure up with each of them. And so I think it's trying to like make the word more accessible, and so we can be more honest with ourselves around what this is. But I think the way you stated it was much better than just
Yeah. Wait, this is so interesting because I want to, as we wrap up, I wonder if I love homework. I'm sorry. It's the teacher in me. Oh my gosh.
You remind me of the homework like right before. I'm like, come on.
Anyways, but I like to think about
students.
Yeah. I'm not shaming you. Anyways, but I like to have something that we can think about. And so I love this topic of comparison because I get a D in it. But I have said one thing that I've worked on and so maybe this is a helpful thing for people, maybe not, but this idea of when I do compare, I'm now getting in the habit of saying, does my comparison make sense to you? So I'm inviting you to say, absolutely not. Or yeah, kinda. Or so I'm not shutting down like my comparison is the supreme comparison. I think that's helping. Do you think that helps or not really?
Not really. I still kind of think like maybe you could ask like, hey, do you want to hear a comparison?
Yeah.
So I think I'm understanding the situation.
Yeah.
But like, I think just jumping in with the comparison. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Again, we got some feedback that it seems to be that like I'm teaching Karen.
Yeah. That was I forgot who said that. Yeah.
A friend of ours, which great feedback. And that's not the intent. I hope listeners know that I am learning a ton from what I'm researching, and I'm just, so,
well, I guess then the little lesson that I'd love for us to talk about next episode is just, did we notice when we jumped into comparison? Because we also know that it's really hard to change. Yeah. And this has been a long time and I'm still not doing it well.
We're trying to wake up.
Okay, thanks for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked reflection and inspired you to engage with the world more thoughtfully. Remember, this journey is about learning, unlearning, and showing up authentically. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, go to our website, and connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep waking up.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.